Thank you for joining me back to me reading Peter James' Love You Dead. Pick up where we left off. Chapter 6. One moment. Here we are. Chapter 6. Sunday the 1st of September. Now Paternoster pocketed his phone and stood by their car. Looking all around, puzzled. Just where on earth was she? No way Eden would have gone to McDonald's. She loathed it. He often had a Big Mac when he was out on the road. He had long stopped telling her, except when he deliberately wanted to hack her off, because he would, always, get a lecture. And she couldn't accept their vegetarian stuff was any good. Had she gone to M&S? She liked their food halls and still brought stuff there, even though, with his reduced income, he felt they couldn't afford their prices anymore. Not until they were back on their feet, at least. Okay, fine. She was still earning a decent amount of money, thank God. But much of it went to paying the mortgage and the rest of the bills. He was well aware she had more income from a portfolio of rental properties she'd built up before they'd met, from savvy investments she'd made from her savings, but they'd always agreed she shouldn't dig into them. He had no involvement in how she ran that part of her finances, or any of their finances in truth. He told her he wanted their basic food and limited treats, including booze, to come from whatever pittance he got from from journeyman cabbing. It was another serious bone of contention, with Eden telling him that his idea of the man being the family breadwinner was just ridiculous and old-fashioned, and insulting. Ever since his printing business had gone under earlier this year, he'd been driving his mate Mark Tuckwell's Skoda taxi on a casual basis, in the hours Mark didn't want to work, which was mostly nights, though through into early morning, picking up drunks, with the ever-present risk of them projectile vomiting and costing him a beautiful £350 clean-up, as well as the occasional fare doing a runner. He made his way over towards the huge M&S store, but even from 100 yards away, he could see it was closed. No sign of Eden anywhere. He phoned her again. Unavailable. He texted her and WhatsApped her, with the same message. She had said there was some charge on her phone. She must have switched it off by now if she was okay. Eden, this is not funny. Where the hell are you? I'm worried. He returned to the BMW and waited. Another 10 minutes. 15. The car park was emptying. Shit. It was now 4:25 p.m. He sat in the car and tried to think through the possibilities of where she could be. Kidnapped on her way to the store? Or in the store? Ridiculous. Came out of the store lugging a heavy sack of cat litter and couldn't find him? She'd have caught or tasted him, surely? Suddenly taken ill? Passed out somewhere? They'd searched the store. Babes, come on. Where are you? He stopped to think. Eden, with her Irish ancestry, had a fiery temper. There had been a few times, in the past, when they'd had full-blown rows over seemingly nothing. Driving somewhere when she had told him to stop, got out of the car, and taken a taxi home. He paused for a moment, but they hadn't rowed today. Not really. Surely? For God's sake. Cat litter? But he knew she was independent and spontaneous. She could have bumped into a friend in the store and asked for a lift home. She'd done that. Also, once before, after they'd had an argument, but today hadn't been like that. Maybe if he drove home, he'd find her there, and she'd have a perfectly rational explanation, one he'd overlooked. Although, right now, he couldn't think of what. He started the engine and drove an entire circuit of the car park, including checking the service areas behind the stores. No Eden. Debating which route to take, he decided on travelling east along the busy old Shoreham Road, checking his phone for a message at every traffic light he stopped at. All the time thinking, wondering where, just where she could be. Neville Road was almost a mile long, on the outskirts of the city of Brighton and Hove. Running north from the old Shoreham Road, passing the Greyhound Stadium, skirting the border of Hove Park, up to the edge of the city near the South Downs National Park. Now turned left at the lights, drove up past the school, then turned left again onto the driveway of their red brick semi sorry. Driving onto the driveway of their red brick semi opposite the stadium. He pulled up a couple of yards in front of the motorcycle storage container which housed his Honda Fireblade, which Eden refused to ride on, and his equally cool Trek road bike. Checking his phone again. Still, no word. He climbed out and walked up the brilliant white front door, which he'd repainted along with all the outside woodwork. During the plentiful free time he had these days, he went inside and called out, "Babe, I'm home!" He was greeted by a pitiful meow. "Eden!" he called again, louder. Another meowing, even more pitiful. Reggie peered accusingly at him from the kitchen doorway. They'd named the platinum They had named the platinum Burmese cat after the gangster Reggie Cray because the cat was, in their view, a vainful bully with huge charm and an insustainable greed. He also had a damned annoying meow. Didn't seem to matter how much or how often you fed the increasingly plump creature, he always wanted more. Some while back, Eden suggested they should have called him Oliver Twist, but that was lost on Niall. Have a quick drink. As were the cat's cries now, but not the stench that greeted him. Weren't cats supposed to get the hang of peeing and pooping outside? Another thing he'd blamed Eden for. She refused to let Reggie out for months. After he'd had all his jabs, and his nuts were removed because they lived on a main road. When she'd finally allowed him out, it was strictly just in the back garden, which they'd had cat-proofed as much as possible. As a result, Reggie now went for hours on end, then hurried back indoors through his flap whenever he needed to do his business. Hence the need, still, for cat litter. Ignoring the creature's cries, he checked out the living room, which was separated from the dining area by an archway. The chess game they were in the middle of sat on the coffee table, a white sofa either side, Suspiciously, he glanced at it, just in case she sneaked home to cheat and had removed another piece. He was already a rook down, but it was pretty much as he'd remembered. She was winning, as usual. Calling out again, he hurried upstairs into their bedroom. With its sorry. Calling out again, he hurried upstairs into their bedroom with its tented ceiling. Eden's idea. When they'd first moved in, she'd seen in some designer magazine and thought it would be romantic to sleep in what she thought felt sort of like a Bedouin tent. Except you could now see dozens of dead flies through the fabric when the lights were on. Eden! He shouted, and went through into the ensuite bathroom. It was empty. He looked at his watch again, then was tempted to check the results of the Grand Prix, but didn't want to waste any precious time. Sod Eden, whatever her stupid game was, he thought, stripping off his sweaty top and shorts, going through it into the bedroom and dumping them in the laundry basket. He washed his face, slapped cold water on his chest, slathered himself in his favourite aftershave, then put on a fresh t-shirt and shorts and his cycling shoes and socks. Next, he bunged his phone, a shirt, slacks and shoes into a rucksack. He would change into them later before his airport pickup. He wriggled it he wriggled it in he wriggled it onto his back, hurrying downstairs as he did so. Grabbing his front door keys, he went out to the storage container, checking the bike's tires were hard enough. Thank God they were. And clipped on his helmet. Moments later, after locking up, he stood on the driveway, looking up and down the pavement of any sign of Eden. The sky was darkening, but he didn't care if he got wet. He pushed off, mounted and pedalled hard. If she wanted to play games, that was fine by him. No doubt she would be home by the time he'd done his airport pickup and got back to Brighton. Chapter 7. Sunday, the 1st of September. God, Cleo said. The poor man. He gave up the throne for the woman he loved and the royal family back when they really treated him like shit, didn't they? Do you think he deserved that? Darling, I don't think you can trust a single word of that show. Darling, I don't think you can trust a single word on that show. I'm sorry, but it makes me angry. If you're going to make a historical drama, you've got a duty to your audience to make it accurate, don't you think? Roy Grace said. Stuff from their barbecue, which had just finished before the rain started. They were snuggled up on the sofa with an equally stuffed Humphrey between them, who seemed as absorbed in the television program as they were. After months of showing signs of pain, he'd managed to jump up on the sofa for the first time in ages. So the massage treatment he'd been having was seemingly getting him back to normal and helping his condition. Roy had a small glass of rosé, and Cleo, pregnant, a glass of water and a bowl of spicy nuts, her latest craving. Her latest craving beside her. The boys were up in their rooms, Noah fast asleep, and Bruno no doubt gaming. Hugging Humphrey, Cleo said, I hate to say it, but you were right, Roy. Humphrey wasn't really getting angry with the kids. He was actually in pain. Now look at him after his massages. It's amazing. He's back to soppy Humphrey. Yep, Roy stroked him. Good boy. Very, very good boy. They'd finally got round to watching The Crown. It was 1953. The Duke of Windsor, having refused to attend the coronation of his niece, Queen Elizabeth II, without his wife, Wallis, the Duchess of Windsor, who had pointedly not been invited, was watching the coronation on a tiny television in their French chateau, with Wallis and a group of their friends. He was standing, cigarette in hand, giving a running commentary on the proceedings, clearly wistful at all that might have been for him, and very bitter at how he'd been treated. At least the Duke and Duchess had the good fortune to be in a decent chateau. Unlike our holiday from hell, one that I booked us, Cleo said. Hey, he said. We chose it together. Well, next time, let's try to make a better choice, eh? Cleo smiled thinly. Ben looked back at the screen. You're right about this show. I was rubbish at history at school, she said. I didn't like my history teacher, so I hardly learned a thing. Now I'm fascinated by it. I want to learn as much as I can. But how can we tell this series? But how can we tell what in this series is the actual truth and what isn't? I read an interview with the writer talking about a scene he made up. So how do we know just how much he's invented? I totally agree, Grace replied. If I watch something historical, I want to believe it's accurate. Otherwise, what's the point? Whatever distortions in this or any other period drama, you'll have millions of people believing mistakenly that was the truth. And that's very dangerous. And not just in this show, but countless other so called historical dramas. Also, Cleo said, it's hard to judge anything that happened in the past by the standards we have today, isn't it? Sure, attitudes in general were different then. Divorce is part of life today. Back then, it was pretty much a cardinal sin. She looked at him quizzically. Would you have given up the throne for me? Without a second thought. She thumped him playfully. Liar! I totally would have. The dog responded by farting. Both battered away the toxic smell with their hands. Humphrey! No! That's disgusting, Grace chided. The dog gave him a baleful but unapologetic eye. And very disrespectful in front of Her Majesty, Humphrey, Cleo complained, picking up the remote and freezing the video. I can't stop thinking about what you told me earlier. Your visit to Guy. Bachelor's notebook lay on the table in front of them. It could end Cassian Pugh's career, she said. But what if it backfired? He nodded. I know. They'd be relying on evidence of a convict, bent stockbroker, and a police officer who's convicted of manslaughter. How well do you think that would play? In the right hands, it would be goodbye, Cassian Pugh. She nodded at the television. When he when he was King Edward VIII, he made a massive miscalculation and lived out the rest of his life a sad, lost man who had given up all trappings of royal life. And your point is? Swap Wallis Simpson for Cassian Pugh for a moment. You are risking everything that you have over you are risking everything that you have over him. You know the Chinese proverb, don't you? Which is, before you seek revenge, first dig 2 graves. He smiled. I will. One for Cassian Pugh and one for his ego. Chapter 8. Sunday, the 1st of September. Mr. and Mrs. Sunderland, account customers of Mark Tuckwell, were a sweet, wealthy couple in their 80s. They divided their year between their house in Naples, Florida, their flat in Marabella, and their penthouse on Hove Seafront. Niall, who had helped them patiently as they had made their way Niall had helped them patiently as they had made their way at a painfully slow pace from the airport to the taxi. Then, from the taxi to their flat. He looked in Mr. Sunderland's Zimmer frame, Mr. Sunderland's floating wheelchair, and an incredible amount of luggage, which he'd only just been able to fit in the taxi, and then carried each of the almost unbelievably heavy suitcases into the rooms they directed. "You're so kind," Joanne Sunderland had said. "There's really no need." It's no problem," he said, sweating profusely. And bless Mr. Sutherland, tipping Niall. He'd pressed a banknote into his palm, thanking him for his help, and told him to go and buy himself a few drinks. Niall, imagine it to be a tenner, or maybe a 20, or perhaps even a 50, thanked him profusely. But when he checked it, as he got into the lift, he saw it was just a solitary £5 note. Either the sweet man wasn't quite up on the speed with the times, or his eyesight was failing, or maybe it was just a tight-fisted old bastard. Due to a French air traffic controller's go slow, which had impacted much of Europe, the flight had been over an hour late. As a result, Niall, cycling the mile back home uphill from the Tuckwell house after returning the taxi, didn't get home until just after 11:45 p.m. By the time he took off the fuel cost and Mike deducted his cut, he'd been left with about 50 quid for over 5 hours' work. Well, 55 quid, actually, including the tip. Throughout the evening, he'd repeatedly called Eden, but her mobile remained unavailable. It was the same with the house landline. No reply. Even so, he had little doubt, as he entered the house, that he would find her either in the lounge in front of the telly or upstairs in bed watching some crime series on Netflix or Amazon Prime. The lounge was in darkness. He could hear no sounds upstairs. He could hear no sound upstairs. Maybe she was asleep. If she was cross with him, hopefully she'd sleep it off and be in a better mood in the morning. He climbed the carpeted treads softly, not wanting to wake her. Walked a few steps along the landing towards the bedroom door, which was ajar, and pushed it open further. Despite the heavy curtains, thanks to a street light right outside, their bedroom was tinged at night with a faint orange glow. He saw their bed, neat and tidy, duvet on top, plumped pillows, and an array of cushions, just as Eden had left it this morning. Okay, he thought. What game are you playing, babes? Despite his tiredness, definitely needing a drink now, he went down to their sleek, modern, charcoal and white kitchen, took a beer from the fridge, and searched around the drawer for a bottle opener, where it had normally lived, cursing when he couldn't find it. Why couldn't Eden ever put things away properly? He tried another drawer, full of graters and other cookery gubbins. Rummaged about, then cried out as he felt a sharp pain.
Ah, shit!
He sliced his finger index open on a razor-sharp potato peeler.
Shit!
He said again. Blood dripped onto the white marble surface. He sucked his finger, slammed shut the self-closed drawer, and looked around the worktops, and noticed a large knife was missing from the rack. Why the hell couldn't she ever put things back where it belonged? Not that he was observative, but not that he was obsessive, but he enjoyed cooking when he had the time, and was always careful to keep everything in order. More blood dripped onto the floor. He sucked his finger again. Then gripped the bottle, placed the cap against the edge of the worktop, and banged it hard with his left fist. The cap flew off, and froth rose out of the neck of the bottle. He swilled it, then pulled out his cigarettes, lit one with the lighter from his pocket, grabbed a saucer from the drying rack for an ashtray, and sat on a high stool on the island breakfast bar unit. Eden didn't like him smoking indoors, but to hell with that right now. If she didn't like it, she could walk into the room and tell him. He sucked his finger again, tasting the coppery blood and racking his brain. Stood up and went over to the pine Welsh dresser. The one antique in this room, where their best crockery was stored behind the glass doors. He glanced down at a framed photograph of the two of them on their honeymoon in the Maldives, in better financial times. They'd paid the resort's photographer to take a series of photographs of them, and this one had been their favourite. Eden in a pink sundress, and himself in a navy blue t-shirt and shorts, holding hands and running along the sand at the water's edge. She looked pretty damn gorgeous, and he looked bloody handsome. The perfect couple. Once upon a time. Next to it sat the leather-bound address book with their initials embossed on the front in gold. A wedding present from someone. He had forgotten who. Despite Eden's expertise in computer technology, she'd always insisted on keeping the names and addresses of all their friends and relatives, and tradespeople, in this book. Glad about that now. He picked it up, carried it over to the breakfast bar, sat, took a drag on his cigarette, another swig of his beer, and began thumbing through the book, thinking. She had 4 really close friends. Close as hell. In the last couple of years, since their disagreements had become more and more frequent, he was sure she'd started turning all of them against him. He could tell. He wasn't an idiot. Always a slight frostiness when they met any of them. In the morning, if she still hadn't turned up, he would call them, and her mother, her sister, and anyone else he could think of. But he was pretty sure she'd be home sometime soon. Totally trolleyed and apologetic, like the last time she'd done this to him. He finished the drink and the cigarette, then had another of each. midnight. No Eden. Where are you? He went to bed. Chapter 9. Monday, the 2nd of September. Now Paternoster was awoken with a start by the clattering of a letterbox. The orange glow of the street lighting had been replaced by daylight. From the brightness around the edges of the curtains, it looked like a fine day. He glanced at the clock radio by his bed. 7:03. The morning paper delivery, he realized. Then he realized something else as he became more awake. The right-hand side of the bed was empty, undisturbed. Hauling himself up against the headboard, he reached over to the table, grabbing his phone and peered at it. No texts. There were a couple of emails, which he opened. One was from a news feed he'd subscribed to. The other was spam. The other was spam his filter hadn't picked up. No word from Eden. He slipped out of bed, padded out onto the landing, and checked the spare room, where she sometimes slept on the few occasions they'd had a really bad row. But the bed was clearly unused. Eden! He called out in forlorn hope she was somewhere else in the house. But the only reply was a plaintive meow from Reggie downstairs. No doubt hungry, as ever. I'll be down soon, Reggie, he called out. The cat responded with a noise that sounded like he was being tortured to death. Now went back into their bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and ran his fingers through his hair. Thinking hard, he rang Eden's mobile, but nothing. Was its battery completely dead? Had to keep trying. Who'd call next? Her four best friends. Georgie, Dem, Helen, and Sharon. Her sister? Her mother. The local hospitals. Worthing and Royal Sussex, in the case she'd been in an accident or taken ill. He went downstairs, threw a handful of dry pellets into Reggie's bowl to shut him up. He made himself a strong coffee, then began phoning each of Eden's girlfriends in turn, telling them what happened. What he got back from each of them was concern for Eden, but not much sympathy, nor surprise. No, they hadn't seen her. Would he please? Would he please let them know when she turned up? Of course. He rang the hospitals. No patient by the name of Eden Paternoster had been admitted during the past 24 hours. Next, he rang her elder sister, Evelyn. She and Eden were close. Evelyn hadn't seen her either, nor had her brother, Adam. Her parents sure had referenced the Bible for their children's names. He rang her mum, who had never liked him, and was interrogated by her for a full 10 minutes. Ending the call, now continued thumbing through the book. Who the hell else might have she contacted? He made more calls. Finally, out of ideas, he looked at the ridiculously modern and stupid clock on the wall. The one she had chosen, which had no numbers on it, so you had to look at your watch anyway to be sure of the time. 8:55 a.m. The house phone rang. Hardly anyone rang back these days. He dived over to the dresser where it sat and snatched up the receiver off the cradle. Eden? It was her mother, wondering if she'd turn up. No, Margaret, he said. Not yet. Will you tell me when she does? I'm really worried about her. Of course I will, Mags, he assured her in his warmest, most wonderful and caring son-in-law voice. You'll be the first. Have you called the police? No, but I'm thinking... Well, I'm thinking about if she doesn't turn up soon, as I just told you. Ending the call, promising again to let her know the moment he heard anything, he stared at the address book. There was no one else he could think of. He'd exhausted all possibilities. hadn't he? Who hadn't he thought of? What hadn't he thought of? Through the window on their small rear garden, he could see a bird drinking from the ornamental bird bath that Eden topped up with water every day. Then Reggie began whinging. Way past breakfast time, eh? Niall said, reluctantly slipping off his stool and walked over to the cupboard where Eden had kept the pouches of cat food, took one out and opened it. Reggie leaped onto the draining board and carried on whining and trying to eat, while he emptied the contents into the red bowl. He put the bowl onto the floor, went back to his bar stool, and sipped his coffee. Then he noticed that the finger he'd cut last night was bleeding again. He must have done it opening the cat food. Sucking it, he decided maybe it was time to call the police. On the other hand, perhaps he should give it a little longer. See if she turned up to work today first. He decided to get some exercise, go for a bike ride down to the seafront, and give her time to make contact. If not, when he came back, he'd call her work number. If she hadn't gone into work she had told him she had a really busy day with a new computer system being installed, then he would really start to worry. Chapter 10. Monday, the 2nd of September. An hour later, shortly after 10:15 a.m., with still no sign of Eden, he ate a few mouthfuls of cereal. Her mobile called her mobile once more. No dice. And then her direct work line. It went to voicemail. Next, he called the main switchboard of the Mutual Occidental Insurance Company, and, when it was answered, asked if operator could locate his wife, telling her he'd already tried her direct line. After putting him on hold for a short while, she tried several different departments where Eden might be. The woman told him that no one had seen her yet, although, she added hopefully, she had been expected in for 8:30 a.m. She had been expected in for a 8:30 a.m. meeting. Niall thanked her and ended the call. Shit. He tried to think back clearly to yesterday afternoon, but his mind was in turmoil. Cat litter? Was he going crazy? They'd been squabbling in the car, hadn't they? Just petty stuff. He dropped her off at Tesco to buy cat litter, hadn't he? His nerves were in tatters. He took an energy drink from the fridge and downed it. Just as he finished it, a text pinged on his phone. Eden! He looked at it and saw to his dismay it was from her mother. Any news? Time to call the police, he decided. But on what number? 2 weeks ago, a drunk shitbag he'd picked up in his cab in the centre of Brighton, who he'd driven north to Gatwick Airport, had done a run on him in the Red Hill housing estate, leaving him with 40 quid on the meter. He'd called the police, 101 non-emergency number, the following morning to report it. It had been 17 minutes before it had been answered. He'd been assured by the operator, whom he gave the details, that someone would be in touch. But no one had. To hell with that. He dialed 999. It was answered on the third ring. Emergency services. Let me try that again. It was answered on the third ring. Emergency. Which service caller? Police, please. There was a brief wait. Then he heard a police. Then he heard a polite, assured voice. Sussex Police, how may I help you? Hi, he said. I'm worried that something's happened to my wife. She's disappeared. May I have your name and address, please, sir? He gave the details to her. Wow, that's a very deep voice woman. The call handler asked him for his wife's name, age, date of birth, and address, which he gave her. Struggling for a moment to remember whether Eden had been born on the 2nd or 3rd of March, 1988, he settled on the 3rd of March. Can you please give me the full description of your wife and the clothes she's been wearing the last time you saw her? He repeated the description he'd given the security guy at the store the day before, adding in a few extra details. She's 30? No, she's 31, 5'7", shoulder-length straight brown hair, wearing a pink t-shirt and white shorts. Then, remembering, he suddenly realised he'd given the security man a wrong description. She'd been wearing her hair up yesterday, pulled back and clipped into a kind of bun. The way she wore it when she couldn't be bothered to wash it. He corrected the description to the call handler. Continuing, sounding as if she might be reading from a script, she asked Niall what he thought might have happened. And if he could describe, in as much detail as possible, the circumstances of her disappearance. He told her all he knew. Next, sounding even more like she was working off a script, she asked him for information about her family, friends, and work colleagues. He answered in as much detail as he could. When when he had exhausted the list, she asked him, Does your wife have any previous history of disappearing? No, never. She's never gone missing before? No. Okay. She did do something about a year ago when we had a row. She went into a supermarket and bumped into a friend and asked her to give her a lift home, leaving me waiting in the car. She'd decided just to get back at me. There was a pause, during which he heard the tapping of keys. Then she asked, was that just a one-off situation? Yes. Do you and your wife argue often? No. No more than any other couple. More tapping of keys. Then, does your wife have a history of mental health problems? No. None. Has she ever self-harmed? Self-harmed? Like cutting herself, do you mean? Any instances where she might have deliberately injured herself? Absolutely not, he said. There was a brief silence, punctuated with more key tapping. Then she asked, Has your wife, Eden, ever talked about suicide with you? Have you ever considered her a suicide risk? No, no way. So you would consider it a possibility? Niall nearly shouted at the woman. Not remotely. I cannot, in a million years, believe she would do that. And all we'd been bloody arguing about was cat litter. You think she'd go off and kill herself over cat litter? There was no response for a moment, just the sound of a keyboard again. Then the woman said, If you can remain where you are, sir, I'll dispatch a unit to you as soon as possible. Sure, Niall said. I'm not going anywhere. How long do you think that will be? I'll do my best to get I'll do my best to get a car to you within the next hour. If anything changes in the meanwhile, please call us back. Niall said he would. Right. I shall read one more chapter. Or maybe I'll just go for another 15 minutes. Alright, Call Handler definitely had a deep voice. Okay. Chapter 11. Monday the 2nd of September. Tell me I heard you. I'm doing Glenn's voice. Tell me I heard you right, Glenn Branson said. He had barged into Roy's office, as usual, without knocking, and perched himself in the desk, and perched himself in front of the detective sergeant's desk. Chair the wrong way round, so that he was leaning, arms folded, across the back as if it was some Wild West saloon. The position he regularly favoured. Just when he thought that Glenn Branson's ties could not get any brighter or lurid, the thickening sorry. The thing knotted out of the DI's pink shirt this morning. Now flipped back over his shoulder, looked like an angry striking cobra. Grace sipped his coffee, both irritated and pleased at the same time by his colleague's uninvited appearance in his office. Irritated because he was trying to concentrate on writing an updated report on his experiences in the Met with the Violent Crime Task Force, which the Chief Constable had asked for in order to see what Sussex police could learn to help them with the surge in knife crime in the country. And pleased because he always liked Branson's company, and he could do with a distraction from 2 hours of fierce concentration. You heard me right. Chicken husbandry. Excuse me. Just what is that? You're not getting weird on hens. I mean, there's some pretty kinky websites out there, but chickens? Matey, I can't help Matey, I can't help your warped mind. But this isn't going to feed it. Cleo and I are doing a course on chicken husbandry at Plumpton Agricultural College tomorrow. A one-day course. Bruno's taken a big interest in our hens. He really seems to love them. Two in particular. The ones with the fluffy feet. Bruno's named them Fraulein Andrea and Fraulein Julia. Fraulein. Bruno's named them Fraulein Andrea and Fraulein Julia. We want to encourage his interest. Branson leaned forward, frowning quizzically. Fraulein Andrea and Fraulein Julia. What kind of names are those for hens? You have a problem with them? He grinned. Whatever floats Bruno's boat, I suppose. His U-boat. Gray shook his head at the comment about his German-born son. Not funny. Branson raised his arms apologetically. Yeah, sorry. So this chicken husbandry thing, does it have a forensic application? Grace grinned. I'm taking a day's leave, okay? I'm owed a ton of leave. What's your problem? The DI shook his head. Detective Superintendent Grace, head of homicide for Surrey and Sussex Police, takes a day off to learn how to look after chickens. And your issue is exactly... Branson laughed. Farmer Grace. He shook his head, smiling. I can just see you rocking up to the next murder investigation in green rallies, chewing on a piece of straw. And what if I do? Which do you think came first, the chicken or the egg? Grace asked. The rooster, obviously. Typical male. It was Grace's turn to smile. Then his phone rang. It was Alison Vosper. Ma'am, he said respectfully, can you hold for just one moment? I've got a weird looking creature in my office. He waved a dismissing hand at Branson. Branson took the hint and headed to the door. Okay, I'm with you now, ma'am. Nothing too nasty. Oh, sorry. Nothing too nasty, I hope, Roy. Just one of those bitey insects you get this time of year, but it's gone now. When Alison Vosper had been the ACC of Sussex, one of Grace's colleagues had nicknamed her Number 27, after a sweet and sour dish on the local Chinese takeaway menu that they frequently used on long shifts. You never quite knew what you were going to get with her, sweet or sour, but something in her tone indicated sweet right now. I'm calling I'm calling you with an update, she said. I've already spoken to your chief constable to put her in the picture. I've also raised this with the commander in charge of anti-corruption in the Met, and he's picking this up straight away as a matter of urgency. Thank you, ma'am, Grace said. But the news didn't fill him with elation. Rather, reverse. It made him feel flat. However much he despised Pugh and all corrupt police officers, the knowledge that what he had told her would destroy Pugh's career and probably the rest of his life was still a tough one on his conscience. As well as Cleo's warning words from last night. First, dig 2 graves. And the knowledge that all he had told her was on the word of Guy Batchelor, a disgraced former police officer in prison, and the contents of his notebook. But, despite all Batchelor had done wrong, he trusted him on this. Enough to gamble his career on should this backfire? He just hoped, as Guy had assured him, that the genie was already out of the bottle, and Pugh was on borrowed time. Just remember, Roy, this stays strictly confidential. Of course, ma'am. Absolutely. Thank you for the update. The moment he put the phone down, it rang again. It was Norman Potting sounding worried. Chief, I've just had a call from the quack. I rang the surgery about some symptoms I've been having for over a month now. Your prostate? No, touch wood. That's all tickety-boo now. No, it's something else. He wanted me to come in this morning, which I guess it's not good news. Norman, I'm sorry to hear that. Let's just hope it's something minor. Will you give me a call as soon as you've finished with the doctor? And of course, if you need any time off, that goes without saying. Thanks, but it won't come to that, Chief. I'm a tough old bugger. Roy put the phone down and sat back in his chair. With the DS's age and his previous health issues, plus the knowledge he didn't really look after himself, he was worried about just how serious this might be. The old warhorse was not a man to wear his heart on his sleeve. He was fond of the sometimes cumoniously detective. And if his news was bad, he had Cleo who would support Norman all they could, both as a friend and a long-time colleague. Shit, he thought. What was it about bad news coming in threes? And that, people, is where we shall end it for now. I hope you've enjoyed me reading the next six chapters. When my voice isn't read raw anymore, I shall continue to upload in parts. So, enjoy the rest of your day.